Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. I'm joined today by Emily Grossman. Emily is the Director of Training at Coordinated Behavioral Care. Emily is a peer specialist, a trainer, consultant, and writer. In 2018, she was named Peer Specialist of the Year by the National Council for Behavioral Health. A quick side note, folks listening in, she has a beautiful reception speech on her website. I'd encourage you to listen to it. It's very motivating and very gracious. Prior to her work with CBC, Emily worked for many years as a trainer for organizations such as Columbia University's Psychiatric Department, the Jewish Board, and the New York State Association for Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. After graduating with a master's in education from Columbia University's Teachers College, Emily got her start in the mental health field, working as a peer specialist. Emily speaks nationally about her work, mental health recovery, and peer support. Emily's with us today to share her journey with mental illness and how it led her to become a peer specialist. Emily, it's so nice to have you here. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Graham. I'm so happy to be here today.
It's great to have you. Hey, I know that part of your work to demystify and break the stigma of mental illness involves you candidly and very vulnerably telling your own story. And I would so appreciate it if you would start today by sharing with our listeners your journey with your own experience of being diagnosed with a mental illness.
Absolutely. I agree with what you said. I'm very intentional about sharing my story. And I do it because I want people to have hope that number one, recovery is possible. But also, I want people to know that there's no shame in these stories. So my journey started at the age of about 18 when I was in college, and I was at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I had made the pilgrimage south. I am a Jersey girl by heart.
Okay.
And they say you can take the girl out of Jersey. You can't take the Jersey out of the girl.
It's true, huh?
Yes, as you can hear by my accent, I'm sure. But in the first couple of months, I was doing really well. I mean, I was on this pink cloud. I felt like I had college handles, and then all of a sudden, I started having panic attacks. And I had no idea about what a panic attack really was. In high school, we had no education about what mental illness was or what panic attacks were. This is going back to 1996. So I really had no idea about what mental illness was at all. My exposure to mental health was really just things I would see on television, things like Fatal Attraction. I don't know if you remember that movie with the star being Glenn Close, how she was portrayed. But, much of the mental illness portrayals that I saw were really unfortunate. And that was all I heard about it. So once I started having panic attacks, I was really starting to be isolated in my room, in my dorm room. I was very afraid and felt very alone and couldn't get to my classes. And I remember calling my mom and saying, "Mom, I'm not even going to class anymore." And she said, "Young lady," in this very motherly way. She said, "Put on your clothes and go to class," and I just couldn't do it. And I really
It became kind of debilitating.
It was very debilitating. And I started really feeling like I wasn't going to be able to get through school. And my mom started to get more concerned. And I felt like I was ruining this great opportunity I had at school. And my mom actually came down to school to see if she could heal me with her motherly love, which was a beautiful attempt. But unfortunately, as we know, mental illness is bigger than family love.
Yes.
And I unfortunately made a very vague suicide attempt. I put pills in my mouth and then spit them out, but it was enough to scare my treatment team, and I ended up going home.
You must have been in a very desperate place to take that step, because that's not something that, we do lightly, and usually we don't want to die. We just want that pain to stop.
Exactly. And I felt like I had, in my 18-year-old mind, I had worked very hard in high school. I really wanted to do well in college. And so in my 18-year-old mind, I felt like I was really destroying my life. But fast forward, I was very soon thereafter hospitalized in New Jersey and given a diagnosis of depression. And that hospitalization was quite alarming. I was 18 years old and on a unit with people that were twice my age, and their illnesses had really seriously progressed.
It must have been scary.
It was. And Graham, I started to feel like I had gone from being just a college student to Emily Grossman, quote unquote, mental patient.
Yes.
You please start to internalize what you see around you. And I started to feel like I was going to have that be my trajectory, what I was seeing around me.
Just around that, am I right in saying that part of their treatment plan for you initially was to look to institutionalize you?
Yeah, so as we fast forwarded a bit, I was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And ultimately, I did go back to college. I transferred to Rutgers University and tried to have a normal college student life. But in the first 2 years, I did well academically, but then I started to really struggle again and was in and out of the hospital that was on campus at Rutgers about 10 or 12 times.
Wow.
And with that revolving door of hospitalization, I did make it through and graduate college, but I half joke that I had a degree from two places, right? I graduated from college, but I also spent as much time in this psych hospital.
Yeah.
And during my last hospitalization, once college was over, I had no structure and I was just not functioning in my community. I was experiencing a lot of psychosis, seeing and hearing things that just weren't there. And I didn't have the skills to really function in my community. And so they interviewed me for the state hospital. And this was an institutionalization idea that they had that I was not going to be let out anytime soon.
My.
And I always had this desire in my heart to make a difference in the world in some way. That was always with me. And I didn't know how, but I felt like the doors of that opportunity were closing if I was institutionalized. And so I remember the day I put on my best makeup, I blew out my hair, and I was ready for the interview. And I just lied through my teeth. I told them that all was well, and I pretended, and I got out of the placement in the state hospital.
Oh my. That's kind of a scary crossroads, isn't it? That could have gone either way.
It could have gone either way. Yes.
How frightening.
It really was, but ultimately it was also quite motivating. I had learned enough skills up until that point that I was finding it hard to apply. And part of the reason I was finding it so hard to apply the skills is because this was the first time they initiated a medication for me to help me manage the psychosis. Was in that hospitalization. So when they let me out, I was starting to not see and hear things as much. And I was learning how to apply a set of skills through a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But that series of coping strategies, which I took like a fifth class, I really applied it to my life and took it very, very seriously. And for those of you who don't know that much about DBT, it's very much about skills to help you manage intense emotions and deal with very difficult interpersonal situations so that you can build a life worth living. And I didn't know that there were skills out there to manage the intensity of emotion that I was experiencing with my bipolar disorder and with the psychosis I was experiencing. So applying those skills really started to move me in the beginnings of a direction towards recovery, along with, quite honestly, being scared straight a little bit.
Oh my goodness. That really stands out to me. I can't imagine how scary this must have been, this journey here. I've got a couple of thoughts around that and questions for you.
Please.
What do you think took so long for your treatment process and the whole assessment and diagnosis? I don't know any other way to say this, but for them to get it right, and whether it's medication driven or what you need underneath around skills, et cetera, what do you think made it so difficult?
It's so interesting. I wish I had a true answer to that question. I I think part of it is that I was a really good actress. So up until the time that things were really falling apart, I was sitting in front of providers and pretending things were okay in the
Yeah.
room,
Yeah.
and then leaving and things would fall apart and they would have no idea that it was coming,
Yeah.
you know? So that was part of it, is that I wasn't being as truthful in therapy as I needed to be. I think also this was right when DBT was coming out. It was an experimental new treatment for people
Yeah.
with borderline personality disorder.
Yes.
And so they decided later in my treatment to try it on me because nothing else was working.
Got it.
And so for the first, I would say 5 to 6 years of my treatment, I was literally sitting on couches complaining about my problems with no skills. And that was just not useful. And
No.
so I think that treatment got better, and that
Gotcha.
was helpful. But I also think that the psychosis came out a little later. And that was something that needed to be addressed as things went on in my treatment.
I get it. I'm really glad that the medication for the psychosis began to help. That's a very scary experience.
Yes.
You know, sights and sounds and everything else. That's a very scary thing to go through. And other people are saying it's not real, but in reality for you, it is. And what I'm hearing is that while maybe some of the treatments were kind of catching up or being developed, you're on a crossroads of looking to be institutionalized. And what really strikes me is the strength you have in this ability to pull it together when necessary, despite all this going on within you, to say, I am not going to go down this road and get pigeonholed, locked away, whatever else it might have looked like. That had to have taken a lot of strength to do that, to pull up your, kind of the bootstraps idea and kind of cowgirl up and say, there's no way I'm going down this path while struggling to hold it all together. That had to have been tough.
Thank you, Grant. It was difficult. It was difficult. I will say that I had very good support in my family.
Fantastic.
They kept on holding on to this idea of remembering who I was and reminding me of who I was before I started struggling. Mm-hmm. And that was a very, very important piece for me, to be constantly reminded that I was quote unquote in there, that even though I wasn't presenting like the person they knew ahead of time,
right,
that person was still in there. And that really helped me. And then this desire to really make a difference in the world, even though I didn't know how I wanted to do that, it was really a driving force for me. It really was unrelenting, this desire that I just had, that I had to make a difference somehow. And so that drove me as well.
I like the idea. There's a narrative that's going on there, isn't there, the whole time of, this is not my best, and this is not my best yet, and there's more for me to give, and it's something about making a difference in some way. I want to get to that in just a little bit. Would you share with us, and I think this might resonate with some people who struggle, what was your narrative about yourself as you were going through this journey? What were you saying about yourself or thinking about yourself and kind of your own identity?
It varied. I mean, there were times where I really felt broken, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like I was damaged. And that was part of what led me to some difficult situations with my illness and my struggles, for sure. But under that, there was this hope. There was this piece of me that personally, I remembered who I was. And I remembered who I was as a little girl, and that I was lucky. A lot of people who experience the kinds of trauma that I experienced later in life have also experienced trauma early on.
Yes.
And I was blessed that was not my experience. So I had a lot of memories to pull on. I had a very, very loving childhood. My parents were both very, very supportive and nurturing, and just gave me the best kind of childhood. So I was able to pull on that and remember that love and support, and remember that I was worthy of that at that time, so that when I was being questioned in psych wards and things like that, I had this inner core of knowledge of who Emily Grossman really was, you know?
Those are some good anchors, weren't they? The history, the family, who you knew yourself to be. Those kind of sounds like they were really kind of kept you anchored in some real truth that in the interim of going through the symptoms and everything else you're going through kind of clouded or maybe brought that into question. But that sounds like it's a really important piece, maybe even for our listeners to hear, that if you can know who you are underneath, hang in there, because we're gonna reclaim that self after this time. Really good. We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Behavioral and mental health professionals provide critical support to our communities in a time when our communities need it more than ever. But they need support too, to continue their education, to connect with colleagues, and to advance their career. And so we've launched Triad, the hub for behavioral and mental health professionals. At Triad, you'll find education, community, and career resources for both current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, all curated specifically for you and all for free. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT to register for your free professional account. Again, that's hellotriad.com/BHT. Come join the community today.
Hey, so fast forwarding just a wee bit, gaining control of this whole diagnostic process here and receiving your master's in education, but you left teaching to become a peer specialist. What gave you this inspiration? I know you talked about wanting to make a difference in life, and I know you are, but what was the inspiration that led you to pursue a life of helping others through the peer support program?
Yeah. First of all, I got into graduate school, and that was a very big turning point in my life to begin with. Once I was in grad school, it was a very big leap to go. I really was still not fully into my recovery yet, and took out a significant grad school loan to go to graduate school after struggling really with employment. But I got to grad school, and the day I got there, or the week I got there, very soon therein, I discovered a spiritual practice that made sense to me. And it was a lot of meditation involved in the spiritual practice. And the meditation, honestly, was something that I really feel, Graham, that if you look at my brain now in a brain scan, which I haven't done, but if you were to, versus looking at a brain scan of my brain previously, you would see two different brains.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't feel the same symptoms. I'm not carrying that black cloud around all the time. It's just a different experience and a different quality of life from what I previously had experienced. So
it sounds then like with the dialectical behavioral therapy, the DBT, and the skills and the strategies that you took away from that, it also sounds then like the spiritual discovery really allowed you to kind of center and create some balance from within.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it gave me a tool to look for answers within. And for someone who had been in therapy from a young age, where I was used to getting the answers from a therapist or a psychiatrist, having this new resource where I could look within for answers was incredibly powerful. So once I got into teaching, which I really loved, but I noticed that a lot of my students, they have radar. They really do. They knew somehow that I was going to be empathetic to their mental health concerns, because over and over again, I had students coming to me telling me stories of their own struggles, and really deep ones. I mean, I was teaching 6th and 7th grade, and I was hearing things that were akin to things that I had gone through later in life, But as a teacher, I was not certified in a way that I was really in a position to help them the way I wanted to. And anytime I would try to talk to them in a way about this, my administration would inevitably find out and not be happy with me, and understandably so, but I felt like I hadn't disclosed about my own mental health struggles in a public school, because I was very, very nervous about stigma around being a teacher. You're in a public school, and you don't know how parents are going to react to having their 6th and 7th grade child taught by someone who is diagnosed with bipolar, So I felt very nervous about it. But at the same time, I had all these students coming to me, and I started to really feel like I wanted to get into mental health. And I had this inner conflict earlier on, but I really wasn't ready yet. I wanted to do more work on my own recovery first.
Okay.
And so I did some research at that point about going back to school for social work.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of going back for another master's, financially, it was going to be difficult, you know?
Sure.
And so I did some more research. I found out that in New Jersey, they had a program called Consumer Connections, which trains people to be mental health professionals in a way called being a peer provider. And I was like, what's that? So a peer provider is someone with lived experience of mental illness who's living in a recovered state, who helps others to recover.
Yeah.
And at first I couldn't believe it. It was a free training, and it was the kind of thing where you could get a paid salaried position with benefits. I remember sitting down with my union director at the time and saying, I need to make this change. And it was my 10-year year in teaching. And he said, I can't believe you're doing this. You have a pension. And I said, no, this is my mission, you know?
That's how meaningful it was. You were willing to give up those things because it was a greater calling.
Yeah, it
Wow.
really felt like a calling. And so I went through the training program and applied for one job, got that job, and the rest is history.
So a peer support, a peer specialist, like you said, is someone with lived experience in mental health illness on their own, who comes in and after their own recovery to help others kind of join with and help others recover as well. I would imagine there are some unique things that bring people to this role. What makes peer support specialists unique, and who gets drawn to this, do you find?
Yeah, so what's unique about it? I would say it's not 100% unique anymore that you can disclose. I know that in some schools of social work and in some schools of counseling, they are teaching about disclosure now.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, when I do trainings in schools of social work, it's not quite as common that they are teaching people to disclose as a peer provider, where most of your role is around, I'm going to share appropriately what my mental health journey has been about so that I can give you hope and infuse you with hope.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use different parts of my story at different times to help you as it relates to your story, you know?
I think there are some areas in mental health where that disclosure can be extremely therapeutic. I think what you just said right there, there's a creation of hope. But sometimes, that old saying, it takes one to know one.
Yeah.
And this ability to have somebody that's in front of you that's not going to hog the stage with their story, but says,
Exactly.
my story has some similarities to yours here. And here's some parts of it, kind of the pithy parts that maybe we can hold back up, and let's see where we can go with your story. But there's got to be a sense of validation in that, some opportunities to kind of right size some things, probably the universality of this. You're not in this alone. That's pretty nice. And I read one of the things you said, I'm just not sympathizing with somebody. I empathize because I've been in their shoes to some degree or another. And I liked what you said too. I'm not just, hoping they get better. I expect them to get better is what you said. I love that. There's that anticipation, isn't it?
Yeah. And, the way I really do that is I elicit people's goals from them, and then I visualize that for them when I'm talking to them. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a client that I've been working with now for 6 or 7 years. And I know that this person wouldn't mind if I told you this part of the story.
Yeah.
Which is that this person told me that they wanted to become a nurse very early on. So what I did, and I said why, and describe a little bit. And this person said, I want to wear scrubs day to day. So I right away from day one began visualizing this person in scrubs. Every time I saw them, on and on and on, scrubs, scrubs, scrubs. If I can tell you, they have been a nurse now for a number of years. And I mean, I carry the visual,
That's really good. I was going to ask, along with the relational piece and the importance of visualization, when I was talking with somebody yesterday, and we were talking about working with children, working in the school system, and the idea of the power of expectation. The Rosenthal effect says if we have two groups of children in two different classrooms, but they have the similar level of potential, but one teacher is told this is not a very good set of students, and the other teacher is told these are great students, they are going to rise or fall to the level of expectation that's put on them right there. I think it was Henry Ford that said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're going to be right. What you're saying here is let's set some expectation. Let's set the bar high and let's begin to visualize very early on what your story can be and what you want it to be. And let's go get it. Let's make it happen. In that process of visualization too, what other kind of services does a peer support program offer folks?
I want to address that, but Graham, I want to just go back to something you said about expectation.
Please. Yeah.
So most of the people I've gotten to work with as a peer supporter are people that have what we call serious mental illness. And I hate these labels completely, but these are people who have been through the system for long enough that there are not good expectations for them. And so I think what's amazing about peer support is that when someone has been through the system themselves and gotten through it, can have that belief and that positive expectation for the next person, where a system is telling them that they probably can't achieve their goals or dreams, but a peer supporter comes in and says, actually, I did it and you can too. That's a really powerful thing. So I just wanted to address that too.
Yeah, that's cool. Therein lies the hope again that you talked about earlier. So with that hope and that visualization and that encouragement by coming alongside somebody, what are some of the services maybe that someone might experience through your program?
It can be varied. I mean, I've done everything from supported employment or supported education. These are really helping people to figure out what they want to do with their lives in terms of employment, helping them with resumes, helping them with going on interviews. How do I talk about the gaps in my resumes because I've been out of school or work for a while because I've been in treatment? Things along those lines, how do I build my confidence again? What should my trajectory be, So that's a lot of the work I do. I really elicit people's goals early on because I think that even if the goal seems far-fetched and hard for them to hold, I hold the hope for the person, But other things peer support people do, a lot of people do a lot of work around benefits, helping people to access benefits, because a lot of us have been through the system ourselves. And so we know how hard it is to access benefits. And so we can help people navigate that system. And then helping people to understand how to advocate with other treatment providers, like how to talk to your psychiatrist about, I'm taking a medication that's giving me a lot of side effects and it's really affecting me. And how do I have that conversation with my psychiatrist so that we can really get on the same page about what I want my medication to do and what I don't want to experience with medication?
Really good. Really good. That sounds like, in addition to some of the DBT things, which equip us for dealing with life, you're talking here about how to deal with things interpersonally, equipping people with some of the skills necessary to advocate for themselves, problem solve, seek services, and kind of coming together around them. As you talked about the importance of your family. It sounds like you provide kind of a familial kind of holding for these folks as they're going through this journey and beginning to become more and more successful with it.
Yeah, I really do believe that the people that I serve and that the people that are going through mental health struggles, they are a part of a larger family that I have.
Yes.
We're in this together, And so that's really important to me, that these are my brothers and sisters who are struggling here,
Agreed. We're kind of rounding the corner here and coming home. I want to just share something. I know you say recovery is a beautiful process where you build a happy, successful life, and you come out the other side of your mental health struggles as the best version of yourself. But I know that to achieve successful long-term recovery, it takes a lot of resilience, a lot of persistence, a lot of grit. Emily, help us understand what recovery means to you now. And if you would, give a word to our listeners who may be struggling with a mental health issue themselves.
So, recovery is so many things to me at this point, but really, I love the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has a beautiful definition of recovery that I really want to read to you.
I'd love to hear it.
They talk about it being a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential.
Absolutely.
And to me, this idea of being self-directed, when we come to a system and sometimes the system tells us that we have to listen to everyone else in order to get better, and also this idea of reaching our full potential. I just wish that when I was first diagnosed, rather than my psychiatrist saying, Emily Grossman, you are a person with bipolar disorder, they said to me, Emily, yes, it appears that you are a person living with bipolar disorder, but this means that we're going to take you through this process of recovery. We're going to teach you how to live this self-directed life, and we're going to teach you and show you that you can, through your recovery, reach your fullest potential.
Yeah.
Because that's what ultimately started to happen for me, and that to me is what recovery is all about. So I really would say to folks that are struggling right now, a few things, that recovery isn't a straight line. I like to think of recovery as kind of like the stock market. When things are going well, the graph still goes up and down, up and down, up and down, but the trend is still up,
Up and to the right, yes.
Up, yes. And I'm no economist, but that much I know. So, there are going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but the trend is still going to be up. So be patient and loving with yourself through the process,
Very good.
The other thing I want to say very quickly is, even though I consider myself in recovery for 15 years, that does not mean that I have not had setbacks. And so living in recovery doesn't mean that there won't be some setbacks, but it does mean that you can live this self-directed, wonderful life where it just, in my experience, has gotten better over time. So I just want to give people hope about that as well.
I think that's tremendous. I love the encouragement that to recognize that any mental health illness is not who you are. It's one dimension of your life. It doesn't define you. It's one dimension of your life, like someone who might have a medical health issue in their life, a diabetic, condition or some chronic decision. It does not define who they are. I also love this idea of being patient with the process, have expectations, realistically set, have people alongside you who can be encouragement and kind of hold you up and buoy you up during the difficult times or a setback. And I like this idea that you're trying to right size setbacks. It's not a total regression, it's a setback, and that's part of it. We're going to have relapses into things. Ideally, we have a plan, a set of strategies in place and people to come alongside us to journey through that setback, to get us back on track again, and again, continuing to reach our potential. So that's a great message. I really appreciate that. Hey, I would love to have our listeners get some resources from you. So point us in the right direction. How can people learn more about you, some of the services around being a peer support?
Sure. So in terms of myself, there's a few things. My website is emilygrossman.net. You can learn a little bit more about myself. And then if you wanted to contact me with particular questions about recovery, you can reach me at info@emilygrossman.net. And then if you're curious about peer support in general, I wish that there were a more all-encompassing place where you could locate peer supporters around the country. The closest I have been able to come to that, and I've done a lot of research on this, is the National Directory of Consumer-Driven Services. Okay. This really puts together all kinds of different peer-run services where you can find peer providers. They have a website. It's C as in cat, D as in dog, S as in Sam, and the word directory.org.
Great.
And then one last thing, if you're curious about where I work, coordinated behavioral care, where I do training. Our website is C as in cat, B as in boy, and the word care.org. And you can find out more about the trainings we offer there.
Very good. Well, Emily, I so appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and transparent with us today about your life, about your work. So thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you. It was my honor. And thank you for all your wonderful, insightful questions.
It was great to be with you. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for joining in as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tribe Network, all rights reserved.